Hi, welcome to another session here on the Art of Meditation Global Summit. My name is Fleet Mall. I'm your co-host for this session. I'm really thrilled to be here today with my friend and colleague, Thomas Hübl. Welcome, Thomas.
I'm happy to be here with you, Fleet.
I'm going to share Thomas's bio and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Thomas Hübl, PhD, is a renowned teacher, author, and international facilitator whose lifelong work integrates the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. Since the early 2000s, he has been facilitating large-scale events and courses that focus on the healing and integration of trauma, with a special focus on the shared history of Israelis and Germans. Over the last decade, Hübl has facilitated dialogue with thousands of people around healing the collective traumas of racism, oppression, colonialism, genocides, and more in the U.S., Israel, Germany, Spain, and Argentina. He has been teaching workshops and presenting training for Harvard Medical School since 2019. His nonprofit organization, the Pocket Project, works to support the healing of collective trauma throughout the world. He's the author of the book, Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds, which outlines his collective trauma integration process as a safe framework for guiding groups through collective trauma. Mysticism and the principles that guide the actualization and practice of embodying these profound experiences are at the heart of Hübl's teachings. In all of his courses, participants can expect to learn from his extensive experience as a teacher of meditation and study of wisdom traditions. I've had the privilege of having these conversations with you before, Thomas, across a wide range of subjects, especially including your work on healing collective trauma, which is more important than ever. And I'm sure we'll touch on that today, but our primary subject today is meditation, this being the Art of Meditation Global Summit. And I know that that is certainly been foundational in your life and path and your work today. So, and as I understand it, even your work on collective trauma, that maybe it found you or you found it, but it certainly seemed to arose out of a time when you actually stepped away from your career track in the medical profession to do a long retreat, a 2 or 3 year retreat on your own. And so I wonder if you could talk about that retreat experience and in particular some of the meditation methods you were using then, or just kind of your background in meditation.
Mm. Yeah, as you said, I meditation was a big part of my life. I started, I think, meditating regularly when I was 19, and that's also when I think started my medical studies. And when I was 26, I left my medical studies for a 4 year retreat, and I like it. That of course wasn't easy because I love science, I love medicine, and at the same time I felt that something inside me pulled me into the kind of inward studies, as I called it at that time. Like I felt I need to follow that call, and I meditated, many hours a day, and it was not always easy, but an amazing time. Like I felt I really studied in a different way from the information that's arising in us, and that's arising not only in me but in the interconnected world. And um and i i had some fundamental breakthroughs or moments within these 4 years, and and there was a different level of recognition that I think is also the basis, as you said, that then later on when I was teaching and running groups, and they were growing pretty quickly, and then these collective topics came up in my groups over and over again. But I think it's also because I learned through my meditation practice to, I don't know, it opened the restriction onto the personal self into a much wider radius. On the one hand, into a level of depth and stillness and emptiness, but also on the other hand, into a much deeper sense of maybe interbeing, as Thich Nhat Hanh says, interdependence, interconnectedness. I mean, there are different words that try to describe that we are actually not that separate in this world. And I think that opened up the gate that I was much more dialed into the collective fields, and also into the collective unconscious kind of spoke to me often when I studied my own group processes. And I think that's how I developed a whole body of work on collective trauma.
It's really fascinating, and it's certainly one of the most common and desirable fruitions of the path of meditation is that we realize that non-separateness, that interconnectedness, or as you said, what Thich Nhat Hanh called interbeing. I'd like to explore with you a little bit the actual methodology of meditation, maybe that you were doing then and that you teach now, because I know you lead meditation retreats. So across traditions, approaches to meditations generally include some methodologies or techniques for stabilizing the mind, for developing greater focused attention, ability to be present, and then also techniques for expanding awareness, cultivating awareness, and developing liberating insight, seeing into the nature of things, which actually liberates us. And in some traditions, those are mingled a bit, and they're obviously interdependent. So I'm just curious if you could sort of describe the approach to meditation that you take personally and that you teach in your retreats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of includes many of the aspects that you just mentioned. Like when I had two types of meditation that I focused a lot of my practice on. One was like an emptiness meditation on stillness, like dropping into deeper and deeper levels of subject-object transcendence. And by that, going into deeper level of stillness, into some sense of absorption. And that I think reveals the what's often called the empty nature, or the other traditions describe this as don't create an image of God, like that there is no image we can attach to the divine. So it's deeply empty. Judaism talks about this, Buddhism talks about it, like Taoism talks about it. So, and that is, I think we applied some of the insights for me that I derived from that practice in the way we apply meditation as a social and relational practice. So, because we teach a lot of what we call transparent communication or deep relational attunement skills, so that the capacity to be present with somebody, that's why also many people that are either therapists or coaches, consultants, group facilitators, study with us, because I think we translated contemplative practice into like a daily meditation in the world that we are impacting right now, and where we are always relating to people, to the environment, to nature, to the planet, to the universe. And the other meditation is that there is I practiced a lot of meditation to focus the capacity of the third eye onto elevating our consciousness into different levels of higher subtle and then causal and non-dual states. And the insights that come with, like every time there is a step in reaching a higher level in that meditation, it comes in as coherence, it comes in as insights, it comes in as a deeper understanding of not just a superficial understanding, but an in-depth understanding of aspects of our world, of our cosmos. And so every time I stabilized myself in one state and opened myself up to the next state, it came with a deeper understanding and with a deeper capacity to be attuned. And so that meditation is like connects our whole nervous system to an alignment with the greater, higher creative impulse of the universe. And that became a deep source of insight for me, this meditation. And it taught me about different levels of light. What does it mean, embodied light? What it means to potential light? What is our future in that sense, when the future is not a later point in time, but a higher vibration in consciousness. And so that and I did this, I mean, now I'm doing this for 30 plus years. And so it became like a different level of home in in existence. And so these two meditations, and then I adapted the insights of that meditation in our work on trauma to be able to specifically tune in with clients' trauma content that is stored in different parts of our nervous system that need that kind of adjusting. So it's a very focused meditation also. And like this, it's like more laser-like. The first one that I described is more open, spacious, and empty. And the second one, at least for some time, is very focused. And that helped me also, what I wrote also in my last book, Attuned, so how we can use a precise attunement as a practice of love so that we meet circumstances, people, situations, also collective events specifically and through a precise attunement. So that's a little bit, of course, we could talk for hours about this, but this is a little bit the journey.
Yeah, no, that's extremely helpful and fascinating, Thomas. And I love the emphasis that it leads into this ability to do this kind of precise work, this healing work, and that that our increasing capacities through training the mind, through meditative training, do lead to precision and to precise insights and precise abilities. And I think sometimes that's given short shrift or just a desire just to be kind of in touch with it all. But there actually is, I think, this need and growing capacity for precision that can be very useful. I'd like to keep exploring with you meditation as a healing modality. So in some ways, it seems like even just generally with meditation, we're creating some kind of field of non-judgmental awareness in which we can allow our being to be as it is, and things will surface quite naturally. And if we're not repressing them, if we're not getting caught in them, it's just a kind of an emptying and a healing and so forth. And then there's the more liberating aspect of meditation. And we actually see into the nature of reality. We see how things are. We see how suffering arises to begin with, and thus we become less caught up in our own personal suffering because we're not creating self-created suffering. And at the same time, we become more aware of the collective, as you described. So I wonder if you could describe a bit your understanding of how healing works through meditation at the individual level, and then how that naturally flows into the collective level. You've been addressing that a little bit already, but maybe more precisely, what actually are the mechanisms of healing that are facilitated by meditation?
Yeah, so first of all, at least for me, what I have seen in healing processes is healing is restoring the original movement. Mm. So stagnation or the violation of what I call the divine law, or the violation of what we could call in another terms human rights, is creating stagnation. It creates a disturbance in the flow of light, in the flow of spirit, in our own bodies and psyches and relationships, but also in the collective body. So it creates distortions in the data flow. And we could say one definition of trauma is that it's a disorganization, either in a body, emotionally, mentally, relationally, or systemically in organizations or cultures, societies. And I believe that meditating on the flow of light teaches us about like our incarnation impulse. So it teaches us how we actually came into form, because information is how information creates a form. And in diving deeper into the subtle anatomy of our being, we consciously embrace more and more how we are coming into form, or we could say we consciously participate in the creative process of the universe. so that we are not asleep as I am in life and I'm walking around in a world. I'm more and more getting to the making of that world. So mysticism, like the mystics of different traditions, were the ones that had, as you said, breakthroughs in consciousness so that they could actually rest more in the foundation of reality, not just be identified with the reality. And so one aspect of healing is that we get connected again to the process of the original alignment. Because once we walk in a world full of trauma, sometimes many people know this, that we don't fully know what is our path. We don't fully know what is true or what is not true. We need to find out. We need to refine our internal understanding and alignment. The more we practice, the more also the ethical values, which I think are an important aspect of a spiritual practice. It's not just attainment of states, it's also how we walk in life every day and how we walk our talk. That spirituality is not just spiritual concepts and intellectual understanding, it becomes the way I live. And in that, the flow, like the embodiment of light, is very important. But we all know how difficult it is to change patterns, to change our triggers, to change our way we interact with the world. That is partly very beautiful, but also partly very painful, as we see right now in the world. And to keep a steady GPS and be part of the original movement is flow. Stagnation and the capacity to detect the stagnation, the roots of stagnations, and enable a new movement, I believe, is healing. And so you mentioned one important quality is the non-judgmental nature, because usually we are either reactive or we become reactive when reactivity comes to us. So, and then one aspect of reactivity is a separating judgment. That's different from clarity. To discern something is a spiritual capacity, but to judge from a separate perspective is actually not helpful in the healing process, and it creates more divides and more othering. And that's why I think a deeper resting in a deeper state of being is crucial for anybody who engages in healing work in the world, but also a more precise attunement to what's actually going on below the level of symptoms. Because often we are dealing with the symptoms and then we say, oh, we are suffering from the symptoms, but we are not really suffering from the symptoms. The symptoms are just on the surface. What is actually going on in the depth that creates those symptoms? So where is the fire and not the smoke? The smoke just is a signpost to the fire. And good healers have a very precise capacity, like a laser, to get to the point of the fire. And then to be able to hold that level of consciousness in and throughout the healing process until we see a real change in the symptoms. But that kind of healing is not that we just try to suppress the symptoms. It's actually going to the root and changing the root so that the symptoms start to fade away. And the last part, and of course, this by itself can be an entire summit, but the other part is that insight, intuition gets opened up through a good spiritual practice, so that speaking is not just a pre-formed, premeditated speaking. It becomes like a flow where we begin to say and know things that we don't know from a separate perspective. When we look at the person, we don't know. But information can come in through knowing, through seeing, through sensing. So these channels get opened up more. So we see, feel, and know more about life. And we notice also that the time-space separation, which I think is an effect of karma, postponed reality is karma. So we all have been born into a karmic fragmentation in our world that we heal through our spiritual practice, through our inner work, through many modalities. We can unify that fragmentation. And one of them is that there is a split in space. It's either in the future or in the past, or there is a split In space, it's here, it's not here, it's somewhere else. The answer is somewhere else, or it's a split in time, which means it's either in the future or in the past. And through a deeper spiritual practice and healing work, we become more present, but presence that kind of embraces that split reality of future and past and gets access to it. And what that means is that the question and the answer, or questions and the answers, they're coming closer. They're not two, they become not two. So we become actually more and more a walking answer. And we see that information is not bound to location, which means that if somebody sits in Australia now and we tune in with that person in Australia because there is a need or a request, that information is equally here too. But our mind thinks, oh no. And then we thought at the beginning, oh, if we do Zoom sessions, oh, but you're still very far. I'm just looking at the 2D image. And then we found out, wow, we can actually do very deep work through Zoom. Even if we are sitting thousands of miles apart, we can feel energy. We can feel actually impact. And that changes the construct in our mind that we are either so far away, that we are not here, that the past is there and the future is there. All of that gets much more liquefied, which I think is part of healing. So long distance healing is actually not something that we can't explain. It's something that I think becomes closer. And so maybe also the technology that we are using right now, like Zoom and video technologies, are a bridge to help us to expand our awareness so that the World Wide Web is not just technology that helps us to be connected, it's technology that shows us how connected we anyway are, which mystics in many traditions were speaking of for thousands of years. So it's not that that's so new. Yeah, so this is all, I think, interesting, and we could say much, much more about that.
Yeah, just as an aside, I've always felt that even the emergence of the World Wide Web altogether, let alone now the video aspect, was kind of just a beautiful manifestation of Indra's net, this natural way in which the cosmos is completely interconnected and wisdom flows. I wonder if you could talk a bit about, in terms of what you were just talking about, the role of the body in this. I think, unfortunately, when some people begin to meditate because they're dealing with all the thinking and struggling with that and thinking they have to stop thinking somehow or something, they tend to be meditating kind of from the neck up a lot. And we live in a very disembodied culture to begin with. It's just kind of evolved in the West and in modern culture. In fact, I have a friend that says in modern culture, the brain has been relegated to, the body's been relegated to being nothing but a brain taxi, just something to carry the brain around, right? And so in meditation, it seems both for stabilizing, developing greater access to the internal sensate landscape of the body, enhanced interoceptive awareness, really feeling the body all the way down to the bones, helps stabilize the mind, and we don't have to struggle directly with thoughts so much. But also in terms of all those levels of attunement you were talking about, it would seem that the body plays a key role. And the deeper we go into the body, body and mind are not separate. So we're getting into subtle body and then subtle mind. You were talking about this third eye meditation that you do. In one way, you're talking about working with subtle energies there, and the channels and the prana and winds or so forth that are the more subtle way that information flows in our body. So I wonder if you could talk about the importance and how you bring the body into the practice and into the healing work.
Yeah, you said it beautifully. The first step, I think, especially for people that start meditation or do it for the first years, maybe sometimes, is that the movement of the mind, when you look at the central nervous system, so stress is a movement upwards, relaxation is a movement downwards. So yoga, Tai Chi, other methods are focusing a lot on how can I learn to regulate my nervous system? and that's what many people do in the trauma work as well. Self-regulation is a way first to come in touch and feel one's stress, be able to consciously impact that stress, down-regulate it. And then I see when my stress level ceases, my mind becomes still. The issue is only that sometimes, and I've seen thousands of people that were going through our programs, that when there's the conscious experience of stress, and then there is the backstage dimension of stress that we are not even aware of. So when we start working on the first aspect of stress, so then we learn to regulate that. But then through the awareness process that induces, we see much deeper layers of stress that go back into childhood, go back into our ancestors, into our collective matrix. And so the noise in our mind is actually a symptom, is like the windmills are turning, but what makes it turn is the wind. So what's the wind that moves my mind? And so the more we get to that, we see, quieting the mind is always a process that goes through the body. So that's, I think, number one, even in modern understanding of the nervous system and sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation. So once we get that, we say, wow, it's super important to be able to focus on the breath, to slow down a bit our breathing, make it longer and slower, and learn to regulate. And then I don't deal at all with my thoughts. I deal with the settling of my mind so that the water becomes clearer. This doesn't mean that nothing is arising anymore, but it's not so bothering anymore. It becomes more like a clear surface of learning. I guess if you look at the world and you see the world moving, but it's not that it bothers me and I'm suffering from the noise in my mind. I think that's an important practice, because once we can settle the mind more, we also can access and practice different states much more easily than when our mind's all the time interfering with that practice. So stabilizing higher states needs a foundational practice, and that's the one we talked about. And I think the other very beautiful aspect is, like in modern times, we look at the body like as a personal property. It's my body, it's your body. This body is as old as it's written in our passports. And I would say, no. When you look at our bodies, they are biocomputers that have been built and refined over thousands of generations. And this body is the living record of life's evolution. It's a living record of our history. It's like a hard disk with tons of data, but often we don't read the manual. Some of the mystical traditions actually are the manual how to understand this biocomputer better, because mystics have studied over thousands of years how to listen to the data that's on this hard disk. And so when we explore through meditation, and once we are more quiet, our body, we see, wow, there's my individual data stored on that hard disk, but there is all my ancestral data. Working on intergenerational trauma, for example, we use the mechanism, all the data that's stored in us, the collective data of our development. And it shows me that life as an impulse is an ongoing process that is unbroken. Like the light from conception to conception to conception to conception to conception, life is living. And I think when we allow ourselves to feel that, first that I can feel my own conception, and then I can tune in with my parents' conception and my so then I see, wow, there is actually an unbrokenness of life. Otherwise, the two of us or all of us that are listening right now, we wouldn't be here. So that there's a huge web of light, of life, the sacredness of life that has been passed on again and again and again. And That's why our body is actually Mother Earth. And spirit is we are connected to the divine creation principle. And through meditation, we more and more see that literally heaven and earth are here. But dealing with our attachment wounds, dealing with our traumatization, dealing with our ancestral traumatization and collective trauma layers that create, all of them create sense of separation. When we open that, we feel more fluid, we feel more interconnected, we feel we can touch into the wisdom of ancestors, the planet, nature, the ecosystem that we are part of. So everything becomes more like a data flow. And I think that's so important, especially in this time when we deal with climate change, with global conflicts, when we go through a massive transformation of global identity structures that need to change in this time. It's so important to be, because we could say this is the basis of what many people call being related. Means I feel the data flow, and this data flow cannot fall apart. All the things that will fall apart when people talk about systems crumbling and identity structures crumbling, these are the calcified or rigid structures that are based on the past. But what is truly related doesn't fall apart because it's flow. And so being more and more grounded in that flow in this time and letting the past dissolve, which is scary often because it brings up a lot of unprocessed stuff. But we are in that time. And that's why I think also what you're doing, like bringing a summit on meditation and harvesting the wisdom of meditation in our world as a fundamental resource, let alone, maybe we can talk about this later, the regulation that is needed to deal with the data acceleration of technology, and why meditation is important there. But I think that's why this resource of contemplative skills is so important in this time, and that we are able to change.
It's like amazing as you were talking this vast genetic inheritance that we all have that is our body. It's in every cell of our body, in our DNA. In ancient language, that could be called the Akashic record. A more modern language, we'd call it the quantum field. As I was listening to also our colleague, Dr. Dan Siegel, talks about his proposed definition of mind is a flow of information, energy and information within and between, right? I love that definition. And I'd like to explore flow with you a little bit because in my experience, as we go deeper into the body, become more and more embodied and develop greater and greater stabilization, and we're moving from a more maybe effortful self-regulation to the body-mind's capacity for auto-regulation. And so we're dropping into a more effortless practice. And in the internal landscape of the body, all of our systems begin to cohere. All the different aspects of the body. We have the heart, different periodic waves of the brain waves, the heartbeat, but all the different glands and systems of the body, they all have their own vibrational rates. And there seems to be a coherence that begins to have, we begin to touch into a palpable flow that's very healing, which then could tap into this greater flow you're talking about. And I'm just wondering, as we're dropping into that, which for me is profoundly healing and universalizing and stabilizing, and it's also something that gives us a new home that's not grounded in conditioning or identity, because it's obviously it's flow. It's not static. It's not stagnation, as you said. But as we open, we're also opening to the embedded suffering and traumas that are there. So I'm wondering if, in your experience, if as people are opening, then maybe things come up that could be destabilizing, and then there's some work to do to move back into flow and go at a deeper level. And just that kind of journey of in and out of flow as the process of healing happens both at the individual level and the collective level.
Yeah, you said it beautifully. You said something right now that I believe every more senior practitioner has felt happen again and again, so that we develop, and that's a basic understanding of trauma work as well. You say we develop a new state of coherence There's a more interconnectedness, the whole nervous system, all the endocrinological systems, all the systems become more synchronized. And then that state opens up more of the suffering that was part of how we came into life, individually, ancestrally, collectively, allows that to come up. But when that comes up, it feels uncomfortable often. It feels sometimes, as you said, destabilizing. And it feels like, and many practitioners feel, oh, the peace, the connectedness, the insight that I already achieved, I lost. And then people start doubting their own practice. They say, oh, wow, now I was meditating. It was so great. And suddenly it's like gone. My mind's racing again. And they're like, and I say, yes, yes. And that's not that you lost something. That means that something went deeper in many cases. Maybe it's not all the time, but in many cases, when we had this stabilization on a higher frequency, then a new deeper stuff is coming up. That's how life's self-healing mechanism works. It wants to detox the past because we all need to learn and study from life forever. And when forever is not a definition of time, it's a definition of devotion. It's a definition of surrendering. It's a definition of humility. Forever means, yes, I'm here for this process. This is my living prayer. That's why I'm living. And I'm here for whatever wants to show itself through me, through my life. I will host it and bring it home. And over again. And I think more senior practitioners or wisdom is when people stop asking how long that's still gonna go. When we become more one with that process, and it's not anymore about time, it's about the love that it takes to allow all of this. And often it's very painful things that come up. It's painful memories of different times on the planet, experiences that our ancestors had, traumas that we have deeply buried in our psyche. And this wisdom, I believe, is the capacity to be there, to be the hosting ground for that process to happen, that we see, wow, if we as humanity want to evolve, we cannot evolve in the same context. We need to open the space for new innovations and insights and creativity and ways to come in. We need to refine our ethical way of living. And all of this is a constant teaching process. And so the more my resistance kind of ceases, I stop asking how long, and I'm more and more present with the process in myself. And the less I avoid the pain that comes up in me, the more I can also be a holding space for other people in similar situations. And that's how we begin to really be with each other, not be with you how you will be in the future, be with you how you are now, including all your potential that we can call future, in this moment. And I believe that's love. That's why I often say, once we walk forever, we have time for now. Once I'm not looking at the end of the spiritual journey, then I know I deeply am arriving. And that's where true love, or what some people call unconditional love or presence, is naturally taking place.
Wow, that's beautifully said. And it seems like from the very beginning, you talked about restoring original movement and, transforming this stagnation that has arisen in various ways. And it seems like this return to flow, it really is a return to love and the healing power of love, that when things are in flow, the natural flow is the force of love in what we call love in the world. I know you work with this as well at the collective level and with large group processes, and and help people develop this kind of coherence and move through these things into various expressive enactments that can I think collectively we can learn how to get back into flow with each other. Would that be fair to say that when we discover how to return to the natural innate flow it is our being, then we can learn through these processes of attunement to create flow with each other that could have healing impacts even beyond ourselves, beyond a group. I know I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Tony Nader, who's currently head of the worldwide Transcendental Meditation Movement, and they're gathering something like 15,000 senior practitioners in South India now to practice to try to bring healing in the midst of these wars and conflicts that are going on. And so from what I'm hearing you say, I would think these collective efforts could have impact way beyond what we might think of in terms of how we usually think of space and time, as you were describing earlier.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say the same what you just said. Is like that once we transcend that notion, which also became a construct in our mind, that we think like that time and space is dispersed. So it's in the future. It's like the question is here, the answer is somewhere, but I don't know where. So the more there's a coherence, and we could see this like once I deepen presence in my heart, I believe the heart, there is an individual aspect to our heart, the physical heart and emotional heart, but then there is a deeper spaciousness. And the more there's coherence in my own practice, I begin to sense the extension of it is that all our hearts are basically in the what I often call the same living room, same sense of spaciousness.
Mm.
And the more of us rest in that spaciousness, we create a collective coherence. So that's exactly what you said. Like it's not just through this specific impact that I have on my own karma or trauma or life, but also through what I radiate into the ecosystem and the way I impact the ecosystem through my way of living and my state of energy, the state of information that I am in also impacts without talking, just by being. And then deeper states of being also impact the space. That's what a lot of meditation traditions are based on transmission, that somebody who deepened meditation into a very profound level, when you meditate with somebody like that, you get the transmission. So it sucks you also deeper into space, so you can benefit from that transmission. And I think many people know that effect, or when you practice in groups, like that the coherence is helpful to get deeper into meditation. But this doesn't mean that we don't have our own work to do. In order to stabilize those states, we have to work on the stuff that is not integrated. Otherwise, our spiritual practice and meditation becomes a spiritual bypass. So I think that's why it's important to have both, to have contemplative deepening and integration practice, which is the karma work that we need to do in order to stabilize ourselves as deeper states and not just flip back into those separate states all the time. And so I think that's that. And then I believe when we as communities learn, and I have seen this many times, that when these large groups, when we do the collective trauma processes, when large groups suddenly tap into what I call the collective witness, that we all notice that now something is different in the room. Like we tapped into some deep presence together that most of the people are aware of in the room. And you can literally feel the different impact that has on the healing of sometimes very painful, very painful aspects of our society. And 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 I believe that that's gonna happen more and more often around the world, that groups tap into this deeper state, because that state, in what I have seen, has a much higher healing potential and integration potential than when we are more separate as individuals in the room. And I deeply believe that that's the wave of collective healing that is coming, because healing is going to move into collective spaces now. And so the contemplative practice is a deep essential aspect of that collective healing. And there are many different layers of impact, as we just described a few, and there are more, obviously. Yeah, but I want to also say that the refinement of how we move in the world, we could call those ethics. And I think there are deep precepts of ethical values in different traditions. And they are important too, because sometimes people like to be in the states that feel good, but we like less to expose ourselves to the alchemy that refines our way to live together, that because ethics are the invisible framework for deeply functional societies. And we need that practice as well, and not to bypass that, because that sometimes seems more uncomfortable than meditation states.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you. And I'd like to let people know where they can find out more about your work and your teaching. There's the Pocket Project. I believe your organization is called Academy of Inner Science. Is that correct?
Academy of Inner Science, and my website is Thomas, THOMAS, Hübl, HUEBL.com, HUEBL.com. So ThomasHübl.com is our main website, and you can find everything there. Or pocketproject.org is our global NGO.
Well, I really encourage people to check out your work and your annual Collective Trauma Summit and just all the extraordinary work you do. So thank you so much for being part of this summit, Thomas.
Thank you, Fleet. I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, me too. Many blessings on your work.
Thank you.
Be well.